Joining us this week on 4029 News on the Record is a University of Arkansas political expert to go over the Arkansas primary results and dive deeper into what this means for Arkansas. Dr. Karen Siebold is joining us from the University of Arkansas. Dr. Siebold, thank you so much for joining us today. And let's start with the governor's race. Both candidates for the GOP and the Democrats making history. Can you explain how significant the nominations were this week?
Sure. Certainly, those nominations were significant in terms of the history that was made, having the first Black man win a party nomination in the state, of course, the first female to win the Republican nomination. So we are making some history in this state, regardless of what happens in the general election. And because of that, there were a lot of eyes on this state. They were interested in what was going to happen in this gubernatorial race at the national level. And of course, partially because of the campaign of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's just 3 years out of the White House at this point.
Do you think that's what is happening here for Sarah Huckabee Sanders?
Yeah, for sure. There was some attention and interest, a lot of curiosity about her and how her campaign would carry its message, the style of the campaign, whether or not they would embrace Donald Trump or more of the establishment. So when you watched the national media yesterday, there was a lot of talk and attention and paid to that kind of curiosity about what was going to happen with her campaign. But it wasn't too surprising. It was expected that she would likely pull out a big win like this because of the momentum of her campaign, as well as her kind of national resume she's built over the years, her experience as a political consultant, working behind the scenes in communications, not only in the President Donald Trump's campaign, but here in the state of Arkansas. So there was a lot of curiosity about how would she be as a candidate? Would she be able to perform? But there was a lot of momentum on her side, as I just said. She certainly had a large war chest to also aid the political skills that she had. And that really set the tone for her race early on. Of course, we saw that, there were several competitors in her race initially that kind of backed away. They kind of got the establishment message that, hey, this is our candidate for this race at this time. They took those signals from the establishment. Leslie Rutledge dropped out. Tim Griffin, who would have been the likely successor for governor, given that he was lieutenant governor for the same number of years that we had Asa. But that just wasn't the case. They kind of took that signal that it was not their time. And of course, that large war chest, it was just a juggernaut. She was a fundraising juggernaut. And that really did kind of set the tone, that early money, and carried her to success.
And there is a lot of national attention on Arkansas right now because of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, but also Governor Asa Hutchinson. You mentioned his name, but he has also expressed interest in possibly running for the White House. So that's kind of interesting, don't you think?
For sure. And because he's being more vocal about it in the last couple of national interviews. Of course, I watch a lot of the media, and Asa has been making his rounds for the last couple of years during COVID because he's been one of those national leaders to really kind of step up and toe that line between protecting rights but dealing with that pandemic. And so that gave him a springboard to potentially run in the next couple of years. And he's been more vocal about that. And certainly does have a national resume and the credibility to run successfully in the Republican Party. If you start to look at the polls that are starting to come out already, predicting who will be the Republican candidates in the primary, he is in the top 10. And so it's a crowded field.
Yes.
It certainly is. But he has found a way to kind of carve out a little niche in that overcrowded Republican field. So yeah, it's very interesting.
And interesting, coming back to our gubernatorial race, what's next for Chris Jones, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and Ricky Dale Harrington Jr.?
Yeah, and so so it was also history making for Chris Jones, our first Black man to win that party nomination. And, we have, an independent that, of course, is interested in being elected. But, it's going to be difficult to offset the momentum of the Sarah Huckabee Sanders campaign. And like I said, her war chest. As of May 14th, it's reported that she has around $4.5 million left in her primary war chest. and $2 million already raised for her general election war chest. She'll be able to carry that primary money over to the general election. Yeah. So she has over $6 million already in her war chest to run. That can buy a lot of advertisements in a state like Arkansas.
That's true. So how do you think the candidates will change their campaigns now that they've won their primaries for the governor's race? And will they move more towards the center, do you think?
Certainly that is how traditionally politics would work. After the primary and you've captured your party's nomination, you would start to pivot toward the center. But that may not be the case in this state because of the number of voters that are Republican compared to those that are Democrat. This state has really become a solid Republican state. And so it is already an uphill battle for Chris Jones. So he's going to have to turn out his base. It's going to be hard for him to pivot to the middle if he needs to turn out his base of support. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders doesn't really need to pivot too much. And right now, policy positions aren't as important as they used to be. Ideology is more important. And she's got the ideology and the momentum and the number of Republican voters, you know, the odds are in her favor for the fall, certainly compared to Chris Jones, who's just fighting for a smaller pool of donors. If he can turn the independents out, that would be a key to a Democratic victory. We have a large number of independent voters in the state. Yes, in general, a number of them do tend to vote conservative, but if the issues like the economy, jobs, taxes in Arkansas, if Chris Jones can find a way to carve out a position that will bring those independent voters out to vote for him, he would at least be competitive against Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
Dr. Siebold, we're going to be back in 2 minutes to talk more about that momentum and then the issues that you talked about too. We'll be back.